Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. I got us just past the top of the hour. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. We got a big group here from all over. Welcome to today's webcast. I am Thomas Meredith. I'm the VP of Marketing here at RTM Consulting, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. And we're also excited to have Wade Little on the line as well, and he'll be handling the presentation for us. We are scheduled for 30 minutes today on this second webinar of ours on PS Digital. Before we get started here, I'm going to take just a few minutes and cover a few of our standard housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, so later today you'll be receiving a link from GoToWebinar with a link to the recording. So please share that with anybody, any colleagues or anybody who wasn't able to join us today. You can feel free to share the recording with them. We have made a PDF copy of the deck available. It's in the handouts panel of your GoToWebinar window frame there. You can download the PDF copy at your convenience. And we are having a brief Q&A session today as well. I know we'll have a brief webinar here of just 30 minutes, but we do want to save some time for a Q&A session at the end. So as we go through the content, if something comes up and you have a question, please enter it in the questions window there of your GoToWebinar panel. Okay, that's it for me. Let's get started. I'll get out of the way here. As I mentioned earlier, presenting today's webcast is Wade Little. He's our technology practice leader here at RTM Consulting. Wade, welcome. I'll hand it off to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Thomas. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in a three-part series, as Thomas said. Today, I'm going to talk about managing connectedness across a broad set of stakeholders, and we'll get into what that means in just a little bit here. So a little bit again about me. Thomas did give an introduction here, but my name is Wade Little, and I'm the technology practice leader for RTM Consulting. You can see more about my background and experiences either on LinkedIn or on our website. In the first webinar, I talked about digital transformation and what it means for professional services organizations. In that webinar, one of my key premises was that it's not just about the technology. True transformation takes people, process, and technology. Also, in the first webinar, I talked about digital transformation being a journey. In my experience, most organizations are somewhere here between the status quo and automated. And maybe they've just implemented a PSA or in the process of implementing a PSA. So moving from here to automated. I've also seen that when organizations move from status quo or information silos to an environment where you have an integrated system or systems that are interconnected, that it requires process and organizational changes. And that is the premise of this webinar. Everyone's now in the same sandbox and has to play nicely with each other. The things that I do as a stakeholder has an impact on other stakeholders. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of very simple use cases. These are use cases that I see happening all the time. Okay. First, let's talk about what I mean when I say connected system or systems. Major functional areas or processes coexist in a single or related systems. In the case of a professional services automation or a PSA solution that we're talking about here, this end-to-end process is the quote to cash. In this solution, sales opportunities become projects. Those projects have tasks or activities that are assigned to people or resources. Those resources, in turn, enter time against those tasks and activities. Those time entries get invoiced to a customer, which then becomes revenue for the company. And that's a simple time and materials example. It's similar with a fixed cost example, except that when a consultant completes certain milestones, the customer is invoiced. The company then recognizes revenue either on an effort basis, like effort percent complete or cost percent complete, or according to the milestone that was achieved. Nonetheless, the idea here is that the invoice and the revenue are based on the work being tracked in the PSA system. So these activities, as you can see, are interrelated. So as resources are assigned to projects, I can see what they're working on and when they're going to be available. I can see this across all my resources. Since those resources have rates associated with them, I can see what revenue I can expect from those assignments. As resources enter time against projects, I can track my actuals against my budget, and I can see how much time is remaining on the project. I don't have to collect time from one system and then update my plan in another. They're all connected. So this is what we're talking about, a connected system or ecosystem. Now, let's talk about the stakeholders in this quote to cash process. While this might not be 100% the same for every organization, this is directionally the who's who in the PSA process. So salespeople create the opportunities and they win deals which turn into projects. Project managers create the projects, the tasks or activities. Resource managers staff resources or consultants to those activities or tasks. Consultants work on the tasks and activities and enter their time and expenses. The project managers manage the consultants, the project's scope, schedule, and budget. Finance invoices the customer and recognizes or accounts for the revenue and the costs. So again, this might be a pretty simplistic view. There may be other stakeholders such as professional services operations or various layers of delivery executives and practice leaders. But the point here is there are a number of stakeholders throughout the process. So as we think about this, connected processes and all the stakeholders, let's get into the first use case here. So this is probably the most common use case I see. It starts with something that is seemingly so benign, a change to a project. In this example, we have John Doe, who's our consultant, and he's assigned to a project and tasks. He's supposed to end one project, in this example, at the end of August. His resource manager, who is very, very diligent, sees that he's rolling off of that project and has him starting on another project in September. But as often is the case, something happens during the course of the project. John's key stakeholder has to step away for a bit and has to delay the project by a couple months. This is just an example. There may be other reasons driving a need for change to the schedule, but the point here is that the schedule needs to change. So here I have the two project plans as they were originally defined. This is the happy path. John was working on project A until the end of end of August. And then starting the new project, project B, in September. So if I'm the project manager for project A, I'm looking at my project in a bit of a silo. I can see the tasks and activities on my project, and I can see what resources are assigned to those tasks and activities. In this example, a key project stakeholder had to step away, and I simply need to make a change to my project plan. As the project manager, I simply push task 3 out by 2 months, and my work here is done. Again, if I'm looking at only my project and the resources on my project, I don't necessarily see that there are other implications. However, if I look at the bigger picture and if I look across a number of projects, I can see now that there's a conflict. John, our consultant is now double booked in September and October. If we continue on here, not only is John double booked in September and October, but John's now unutilized or idle in July and August. Also, when John was scheduled for work in July and August, he was expected to generate revenue in those months. Now that his schedule's changed, the revenue that's associated with his project assignments has also changed. So the revenue that I was expecting to earn in quarter 3 has now slid into quarter 4. So again, this all started with something that was very, very simple, something that was very, very common, a project manager making schedule changes to his or her project. As a result, and not necessarily of his or her doing or even knowing necessarily, the resource, John, is now double booked. The resource manager, who presumably in a connected system, a PSA system, sees that there's a conflict because he or she can see across a wide set of resources and the projects that they're working on. This resource manager is now tasked with resolving this conflict. As I mentioned previously, finance is also impacted as their revenue forecast has now changed. I can't tell you how many times I've had finance customers who are looking at the backlog or looking at a revenue forecast ask, what happened to the revenue? In this case, the project has changed. Many times sales or account management or maybe even delivery executives have to now get involved to help manage customer expectations. Maybe project B needs to start later. Maybe John needs to roll off of project A altogether. But someone in the organization has to communicate the changes to the customer. So this was use case 1. One simple change, as you can see, has broad and sweeping impacts on a number of other stakeholders. So on to another use case. And another pretty common situation, and there are slight variations here that I'll touch on, but in this scenario, the salesperson is in the process of selling a large project. Delivery catches wind, gets involved at an early stage, starts to get their project set up. At the last minute, the salesperson gives a discount to the customer. This information, however, doesn't get communicated to the project manager. I'm sure this has never happened, right? So we have here the original project where the consultant was going to be billed out at $200 an hour. At the last minute, the salesperson discounts the rate to $175 an hour. Again, this is a time and materials example. This could also apply to a fixed fee example where the overall price of the project gets discounted. But the idea is at the last minute, there's a change that happens that doesn't get communicated to the project manager. And so the project manager and delivery sets up the wrong information. So going through our stakeholder wheel again, just like the last example, we can see how the various stakeholders are impacted. First, sales discounts the project and doesn't inform the project manager or the delivery team. The project manager sets up the project with the non-discounted rate, which is the wrong rate. The consultant who knows nothing of the rates just goes through and works on their tasks and activities and enters their time against the project. Finance invoices for the consultant's time, or in the case of a fixed price, they invoice the project milestone, the wrong rates here. The customer disputes the invoice. The statement of work says you're supposed to invoice me at $175 an hour, but you're invoicing me at $200 an hour. What gives here? So now we have to unwind this whole process. Finance has to issue a credit note. have to make a revenue adjustment. The project manager has to update the project with the correct rates. The margin on the project has now changed. Maybe I have to re-baseline the project. There's just, it's a mess here. There's an awful lot to fix. And again, this all started with a seemingly benign change. A salesperson offering a customer a discount, and maybe a bad handoff here with delivery. Communication issues here, but we can see the impacts on all of the other stakeholders in this connected environment. Now, this case was a wrong rate, but another similar and very, very common use case may be when the project is over budget. So the consultant enters the time, finance bills for it, the customer disputes it because you've exceeded the budget. So now, just like in this example, I have to do a lot of extra work. Maybe I have to get a change order. Maybe I have to create a non-billable code. Maybe the consultant has to re-enter their time to the non-billable code. So changes or mistakes made have an impact on other stakeholders. Okay, so what does all of this mean? So what? Well, in a connected system, there are many stakeholders in the same proverbial sandbox, right? We all have to play, we're all in the same sandbox, we have to play nicely. Changes by one stakeholder, as we saw, can have an impact on all the other stakeholders. There are trade-offs in the process here. My experience also says that some stakeholders are benefiting more than others. So who's getting the short end of the stick here? Is it finance paying the price because the project managers aren't updating their plans, their budgets, the rates, and finance is the one having to deal with all the fallout from the mistakes when the customer disputes the bill, like in the example that we just went through? Are the PMs paying the price because finance is demanding an accurate forecast, an accurate revenue forecast, and they just don't have the time to manage all of the administration across all of their projects? So this is an area where we have to be careful. If you get one stakeholder group that's very dissatisfied, they may start managing processes offline. This is where things go sideways. I think they start managing things offline or in other tools or in spreadsheets, which is likely counter to the intended outcome of the transformation and the automation to begin with. Are you organized for success? Do you have or need to establish a resource management function? So in the example I provided earlier, who sees the bigger picture and can resolve resource conflicts? Maybe in moving from a siloed environment to a connected one, I now have the tools available to see across a broader set of resources and projects, and now I need a new process or organization to address this change and to absorb this change. In a connected environment where changes impact other stakeholders, if your project managers are overwhelmed with maintaining accurate plans, would a PMO function help to ease this administrative burden? So how do you get optimized? So first, you have to identify the goals of the organization. What is most important? Is it utilization? Is it project margin? Do you even care about project margin and just mostly concerned with customer satisfaction and on-time delivery? I see that in a lot of organizations as well. So number two, take a process-centric approach. In doing so, you can identify the key touch points across the different stakeholder groups and eliminate the cracks or gaps in the handoffs between the different stakeholders. Third thing, finally, align stakeholders, processes, and system design to the business outcomes. This is key. So if utilization is king, make sure that you have an organization, processes, and a system design to optimize utilization. If project margin or on-time project delivery is king, make sure project managers have the tools and the support they need to effectively manage their projects. So that's it for today's webinar. As a reminder, we have a new website, ps-digital.net. Please come and visit us. And Thomas, I guess with that, we'll turn it over to you for any questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Wade. Yeah, we have got a few minutes here at the bottom of the hour here to go over some questions that are coming in. Please, again, if you have any from the content that Wade just went through, you can enter them in your go-to webinar window, and we'll get started. Wade, this is good because it tells me that there are folks on the line from different roles and you know, across the stakeholders that you had on your slide. So this is good. He says, I'm a finance operations user and can definitely relate to being a stakeholder on the short end of the stick. We are constantly dealing with errors and over budget projects. What do you recommend? Now, I know you could probably take the rest of the hour on this one, but what do you recommend?
Yeah, well, you know, it's a great question, and you know, that's why I mentioned it, and that's why we covered it as one of the use cases. It's not an uncommon issue, and quite frankly, probably the most common thing that I see. And out of all stakeholder groups, you know, finance operations, you know, everything flows downhill, right? And so, so again, it's a pretty common thing that I see. So, you know, what I'd recommend is moving the involvement up in the process. So establishing a governance process where the project, for example, where the project cannot start until, you know, finance operations or someone at least has reviewed the SOW, compared it to the dates, the rates, all of the information that's in the SOW, and and they certify that the project is set up in accordance with that SOW, right? So that we don't have that situation that we had earlier where we had the rate change, right? You know, regarding the over budgeted projects, because again, this was, you know, another one of the examples I provided, and again, something I see quite often. So, you know, similarly, and depending upon your PSA, there may be some options to put some guardrails in place that don't allow projects to go over budget, right? It won't let you either enter time over budget or invoice over budget. But regardless, it can also sometimes be managed via governance or at minimum through reporting. So all projects that are nearing their budget maximum should be reviewed by all impacted stakeholders so that the broader team can take a proactive approach rather than a reactive one, right? So, but the key is, you know, earlier involvement here.
Okay, good. All right, had another one come in, and she, has a resource management angle. She is a resource management role at her company. She says, our project managers are always making changes to their projects and extending resources or changing their assignments. Pretty, I'm sure you've heard that one before. What do you recommend in terms of the right process for managing these changes?
Well, another really good question, and one that comes up often, and so much so that I put a slide together that kind of describes this dynamic between the project manager and the resource manager. You know, suffice it to say, there's no one size fits all answer, but let me navigate here to the
Yep.
slide. So I won't have enough time to go through this entire slide. There's a lot of content here, but this is in the webinar deck. So if you want to download the deck, you have it as a reference. But the concept here is that projects can be viewed along this PM RM continuum. So on the left-hand side, there's typically less resource management involvement and a little bit more freedom for the project manager to make changes, as long as the beginning and the end of the assignment, or the beginning and end of the project, is coordinated, right? But in the middle, they should have a lot of freedom and flexibility to make some changes. Now, on the right side of the continuum, this is typically more resource manager centric and a lot more highly transactional, right? Shorter duration projects. And then in the middle here, it requires more project plan contouring and a lot more coordination across the resource manager and project manager. So this is where a governance process might be needed, perhaps some sort of a request and approval type process going back and forth between the resource managers and the project managers. Again, I encourage you to download the deck and to take a deeper look into this slide, and of course you can always email me with any questions.
Okay, thanks, Wade. Yeah, go back to your contact slide just so they have that here. Yeah, there you go, for the remainder of the time. We do have time for one more. This one came in, Wade. In a fixed bid project, how critical is time tracking when in reality, the resources will strive to hit the targets, but aren't actually charging for their exact time?
Another great question. So while on the surface, it seems like time entry is irrelevant, it's very, very relevant. And again, when I talk about what's important to your organization, let's take one example of project margin. If the consultants aren't entering time against a fixed bid project, I can't measure project margin. I have no idea what that project margin is. That's number one. And number two, if resource utilization is super important to me and people aren't entering time, I have no idea what their utilization is like. So again, tracking back to what are the outcomes that I'm trying to achieve, and looking at just those two examples. Again, seemingly, while time entry may not be important, it's absolutely critical.
Yep. Okay. Good. Thanks, Wade. I wanted to get that one in. Okay, I've got us at 12:30 Eastern time here, and that's our allotted time of 30 minutes. But you have a couple the email addresses there for info@rtmconsulting.net, as well as Wade's email address. If you guys are reviewing the recording or looking over the deck and have any questions, feel free to reach out. But with that, I want to wrap things up here. I would like to thank everybody who joined us, spent 30 minutes with us today on our second webinar. We will have a third PS Digital webinar coming up shortly as well, so be on the lookout in your email inbox for information about that one. And Wade, I'd like to thank you again for taking some time out, sharing your perspectives here. I love the topic, and I think with the questions that came in, I think the folks on the line did as well. Great. So with that said, I would like to wrap up today's webinar. Thank you, Wade. Thanks, everyone, and you all have a good day.